the top of the mountain. I threw my arms up to the sky and I said, I am miserable in the extreme and see no way out. And in that moment, this total sense of calm washed over me. I was surrounded by bright white light. A voice came out of the light and it said, can't you see you've come home? You'll stay here and heal yourself and many others. That dramatically changed my life in a moment.
Welcome to the Awaken Magazine podcast, where we feature inspiring leaders who are helping our world awaken to love. I'm your host, David Trotter, and today I want to share with you an inspiring conversation with Suzanne Ross. She's a spiritual guide, a psychic intuitive, an author, an event producer. I mean, this lady does it all, and she is full of joy. You are going to love this conversation. We dive into when she believes that we will have open contact with extraterrestrials. Spoiler alert, she says just in the next few years, and she tells us why. We also talk all about how to embrace transcendence as a way of living. And it's so fun to hear Suzanne talk about how she embodies this in her day-to-day life. We also talk about her Omne Retreat Center, about her Up trilogy of books. We talk about her sacred certification courses and her events in Sedona and San Diego. So you're going to love this conversation. I really would encourage you to subscribe to the Awaken Magazine podcast if you haven't already. We produce this on Spotify, Amazon Music, Apple Podcast, and YouTube. Click subscribe, rate, and review the show. And hey, share with a friend, because your friends will be just as inspired by this conversation as you are. All right, let's jump into my conversation with Suzanne Ross. Well, Suzanne, thanks so much for taking time to connect with us today. It's great to be with you.
Thank you, David. I really appreciate you having me on. I'm so excited to dive into our fascinating interview.
Yes. I know your life has been impacted by other entities, as we might call them, ETs, right? So, and we'll get into that as part of your story, but I want to know from your perspective, with all that's been kind of getting revealed in the world these days, how soon do you believe we will have open contact with ETs, if ever?
I believe it is in the next few years, David, and there's a few reasons for that. One, we're on this accelerated evolution. And I'm a big fan of a book called The Bilgi Kitabi. It's all channeled material. It's 1,000 pages. A woman in Turkey has been channeling this alpha channel, but she references over and over and over again this accelerated evolution plan that's been put into place by all of these advanced beings who are in support of the evolution of humanity and who say we are going into the golden light year. And all of us have that feeling that we're moving into a golden age. There's a big shift coming. There's also an astronomical event called Apophis. This comet, Apophis, is going to be coming very close to the Earth's atmosphere in 2029, Friday, April 13th, 2029. Apophis means the Egyptian god of chaos. Some say the Egyptian god of death and darkness, but it is expected to have a dramatic impact on planet Earth. Some people believe that the tail of the comet will cause a solar flare, a massive flash of solar light. And a lot of people who say, this shift will be preceded by this, huge flash of light, that these solar flares somehow accelerate our ascension process. And in the tech world, many people believe that in 2030, there'll be the singularity. And you know what that is. It's like when everything's AI, right? And so on many levels. The New World Order talks a lot about 2030, right? The spiritual community talks about the ascension coming soon. The ufology community talks about contact soon. And then, astronomers are talking about this Apophis and what its impact will be. So I really believe in the next, 5 years, we're going to be on such an accelerated path, and there's going to be these, astronomical events that accelerate the ascension. And that includes contact with our solar brothers and sisters, our star brothers and sisters, who are really supervising our ascension.
Thank you for sharing that. It's a lot to take in. I'm marking my calendar, April 12th, 2029.
Friday the 13th.
Oh, it's the 13th, Friday. Okay, Friday.
You should be able to remember
13th.
that. Friday
April
the 13th.
Okay, good. Talk to me about your own story of awakening to consciousness, mindfulness, spirituality as you were growing up. I know your father was very much in the world of science. Did you have some sort of faith or spirituality as you were growing up as a young person?
We didn't. I would even say that my father was an atheist and my mother was sort of agnostic. So no. And my father was very much a scientist. He was a computer genius, and I'll, tell that story because there's a cool story behind that. But we had a ton of books, and you can't really see my bookshelves, but I've got hundreds and hundreds of books. I write books. I love books. My sister's a book publisher. And so growing up, we just read and read and read and read and read. And my parents read to us and just loved books. And most of them were actually historical. They were like factual books about history and geology and astronomy and, all kinds of fascinating things about our own history. And so that was my upbringing. But my father had a missing time experience when he was 18 years old, which really set the stage for the rest of his life and how we grew up in our household. He spent a lot of times pointing to the constellations in the sky and letting us know there was life out there in the universe and what the different constellations were and how the Pleiades was a star nursery and the Orion, belt of Orion, he was very focused on.
Now, just for people who don't know what a missing time experience is, would you mind describing what he experienced?
Thank you for asking. Yeah, so missing time experience is when you might see something anomalous in the sky, and the next thing you know, you're standing there as if nothing ever happened, and then you realize it's 4 hours later. And so for my father, he grew up in a little town called Leader in Saskatchewan in Canada. And him and his buddies after dinner one night were driving down a dirt road. And as there was 4 in the car driving down the dirt road, they saw this white light behind the car, in front of the car, out in the field. It wasn't kicking up any dust. The 2 guys in the back seat were freaking out. My father pulled over. Him and his best friend in the front seat got out, leaned against the driver's side door to see if this thing would go past them. The very next thing they remember, they were sitting in the car looking at each other. This white light sped across the field, merged with a larger orange light, and took off into space. And they were like, whoa. So they went to the nearest farmhouse, were banging on the door. The woman was furious. They were knocking on her door after midnight. They were like, after midnight, we just left after dinner. And they realized they lost 4 hours of time. Now, the next morning, my father woke up and realized he had a triangular shaped metallic object in his wrist, just under his wrist, a gray metallic object. Growing up, when we were old enough not to be freaked out by this, my father told us about this experience, and he called this his alien chip. Growing up, this was his alien chip.
And now, when you were a kid, you could feel it? You could feel it in his arm?
It was slightly raised. It was slightly raised, and it was always there. And sometimes he would hold it. Now, my father grew up in a one-room schoolhouse in the middle of the prairie. He didn't go to college. At 18 years old, shortly after this incident, he was recruited by National Cash Register Company. He became a pioneer on the front lines of the emerging computer age. He became a professor, wrote books, taught courses, became a computer engineer. Then he ultimately became head of computer software for NCR. And he did talk about, he felt it had something to do with his missing time experience and this alien chip.
My goodness. And so with that knowledge, he then is obviously raising you with this belief that there are other things out there. And so when you were a little kid, was that just like you just believed that from the very beginning? It wasn't something that you had to adopt later in life and like come to that understanding? You just started with that belief? Is that true?
That is true, and as little kids, you're very impressionable. And my father would just point to the sky. In fact, at his funeral, there was a beautiful painting of him pointing to the sky and me as a little girl sitting next to him looking up at the stars, because we spent a lot of time doing that. And, he was rather obsessed with other star systems. And, he had all these astronomy books and he had a telescope. And, that event, altered his life dramatically. And and then as soon as Star Wars came out and Star Trek and, he just loved all that and watched, all of those episodes, and we sat right there with him. And, so he was really interested in that. But as a kid, I can tell you that I was about 6 years old when I started having these visitations at night by these blue beings. There would always be 3 of them. They would stand on either side of my bed, and at the foot of my bed, I called them Caspers because that's the only reference I had for them. They were loving beings. I looked forward to them coming to visit, and I knew they were doing something that made me feel really good. It was very loving transmission of this beautiful blue light. And so that, was very prevalent for me until about the age of 8. And then I really started coming into my own identity as a kid, and that all kind of faded out. Okay, so I was born in Mount Shasta, at Shasta County Hospital. And so we spent a lot of time hiking in the woods around Shasta, going to Lake Shasta. And as you know, that too is a spiritual mecca and a UFO hotspot. And so kind of interesting that I should be born there. Right. And so we had a lot of interesting experiences out in those woods of Mount Shasta where we saw fairies, elementals. We even had an experience with a troll. I kid you not.
You just stop right there. Like you're just like mic drop. Boom. We had an experience with a troll. Mic drop. Well, I don't even know what to say. Oh, okay. What was their name?
Okay. So we had this cat my mother named Lucifer, this big black cat. And so as kids, we'd go hiking out in the woods, and my mother would send this big black cat with us because the cat would chase off rodents. And so the cat would be outdoors all night hunting. And in the morning, my mother would open the door and there'd be a dead bird, a dead mouse, a dead rabbit. And so my mother opens the door one morning and there lays this little man who looked like those troll dolls you would have as a kid with the orange hair sticking up, no genitals, just a little man, not even 2 feet long, laying there on the doorstep. My mother screams bloody murder and screams for us to get away from the door. But as little kids, we saw what we saw. My sister and I, my mother. So it was dead. My mother wrapped it in a blanket and buried it in the backyard. That is an honest to God true story.
Where are the photos? I want to see photos, Suzanne.
Right. I know. People always want to see photos. People want to see photos of my dad's chip. He didn't take photos. He was a private man. But I can tell you that story has more to it. My father, after getting recruited by NCR in Canada, I was born in Mount Shasta. He was moved to Dayton, Ohio, right next to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. My father spoke German because his mother was German. He was working very closely with Wright-Patterson during the time they were doing reverse engineering. And those NASA scientists who were German speaking because they were brought over here from Germany to start NASA, right? He would actually have meetings with those men in our home, going over blueprints, etc. And that was Project Paperclip. So, there's a lot more to these stories that legitimize, what I'm sharing with you. People have asked to see my birth certificate that I was even born at Shasta County Hospital. I'm happy to share that. These are real things that happened. My father worked for NCR from the age of 18 to the age of 68, 50 years when he retired. And so, yeah.
Amazing. So at what point did you start to sense that you had some sort of intuitive gifts that, well, one that you might be able to experience for yourself, but then share with others here in the world?
Thank you for that. So I started to tune back into my gifts because when I was a little kid, my parents actually built me a dollhouse so that I could sit out there and talk to all of my invisible friends because I always had all these invisible friends, right? And so then when I was 29, I was living on the East Coast. I lived on the East Coast for about 7 years, working in the corporate world. And I was upstairs in my room one morning and I heard footsteps coming up the stairs. And I was aware that beings were coming into my room. I felt paralyzed. I couldn't move. And then when I was able to move again and come to, I knew that something had happened. Something happened to me and it had something to do with these beings, but I didn't know what it was. I'll tell you, I got hypnotized later and discovered what it was. At that time, I was becoming very restless with my life in the corporate world, married to a corporate executive, pursuing the American dream. I felt like it was a nightmare for me. It was misaligned with my calling. I felt like my life lacked meaning and purpose. I ended up going to visit my parents in the desert of Southern California. And while I was there, I had an experience on a mountaintop, which is the cover of my book, Wake Up, because that experience changed my life dramatically, and it was only months after the experience in my bedroom. Now, I was visiting my parents and starting to experience joy and laughter and fun and sun, and I was having the time of my life, and then it occurred to me I was going to have to go back, and I was filled with this impending sense of doom. I woke up one morning, the sun was coming up behind the mountains. I felt compelled to run to the mountain range. I ran straight up the mountain. I got to the top of the mountain. I threw my arms up to the sky and I said, I am miserable in the extreme and see no way out. And in that moment, this total sense of calm washed over me. I was surrounded by bright white light. A voice came out of the light and it said, can't you see you've come home? You'll stay here and heal yourself and many others. That dramatically changed my life in a moment. In that moment, I felt completely altered. The stress, the anxiety, the depression melted away, and I was filled with so much enthusiasm and excitement over my new life in the desert as a healer. And I knew that was the absolute truth for me. I ran down the mountain. I got dressed. I got in my vehicle. I drove to the nearest 5-star resort and I said, I'm here for a job in wellness. And they said, oh, you must have seen the ad. Okay. So the human resource manager came out. I sat with her. She said, we do have a position in wellness. We have this open position. Would you like to take it? I mean, no resume, no qualifications. Sure. Can you start in 2 weeks? Yes. And then I got out into the parking lot and went, what have I done? What have I just done? It was as if there was some sort of force outside of myself directing me to do this, to do that. I felt like I was watching myself from above as I went through the motions. So I had to tell my parents, guess what? I had to call my husband, guess what? I'm leaving you and I'm moving to California and I'm becoming a healer. Say
Mm.
what? My mother said, have you lost your mind? I said, no, I think I finally found it.
Amazing. And as all of our stories, there's so many different seasons of life where things begin to unfold that I'm sure you began to develop lots of different skills and talents and experiences. One of the things that I see a theme in all of your work is this word transcendence. And obviously, your website is Suzanne Ross Transcendence, and you talk about transcendence as a way of living and being. Talk to us about, what does that word mean to you?
So that word came to me about 5 years ago. As you know, I'm very focused on ascension. And my second book, Rise Up, is 10 Days on the Ascension Path. And I host Sedona Ascension Retreat every year for the last 10 years. But this concept of transcendence came to me as I took these long walks out in nature. I call walking meditations. And when I go on these walks, I become very present in the now moment, very present with all of creation, with all of the living things and beings. And if my mind starts to wander to my emails or phone call, I redirect back to the present moment. It helps to put your hands on your heart and imagine that you are here and now, just like the cross, right at your heart. And in your heart space, you can enter the eternal now moment, the place where your soul is existential, eternal, existing in the now. And in that space, magical things unfold. For me, the environment becomes sparkling with fluorescent lights. I feel like I can telepathically communicate with the living things and beings around me, and they respond. On my walks, there were these large egrets. They would come right up to me, and I would telepathically let them know, I love you, you're beautiful. They wouldn't try to fly away. I'd walk up to a big rose bush. It felt as if the rose was reaching out to me. Magical experiences would happen to me. And I knew that I had entered a different version of reality in this state of transcendence. And so my goal has become to achieve this state of transcendence and sustain it, right? Because it's difficult to sustain it. You get home, you got to go to the grocery store, you got to run to the post office, you got to pay your taxes, you got to do the laundry, right? It's hard to stay in that transcendent state, but you can make a mental, spiritual, emotional effort, right? It shouldn't be effortful. It should be effortless. But at first, you really have to do a practice I call redirect. It's like redirect, redirect, redirect. And that also includes like negative thoughts come in. You're not just going to push them away, of course. You're going to notice them and try to understand, why is that arising for me? But at the same time, you're going to, replace it with a more positive, loving, kind, compassionate, caring thought. And the more that you do that, and the more you practice these states of transcendence, whether it's in seated meditation, walking out in nature, the more you're able to sustain it. It becomes a way of living and being.
What are you transcending in those moments? Like, what is it that you're transcending?
That is a very good question. I would say separation. I would say my ego. I would say darkness. I would say, anything that comes from my ego that creates separation and drops my vibration.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And the way you're telling me to transcend those things is to essentially come into the here and now. Somehow just come into the present moment. Is that, I don't want to
That's a good
oversimplify it
start.
because,
Yeah.
right, there you go. It's a start. So if I'm have my hands on my heart, as you suggested, like help us out here, because you're bringing a certain level of energy to our conversation that is really contagious. And so I'm sure as people are either watching this or listening to this, they're like, I want some of what she's got. So, right, we're coming into the present moment, right? And you said that when other thoughts come to us, that we're redirecting ourselves back to the present moment. How do we do that in the midst of the stress and turmoil, as you said, the grocery list, the emails, the phone calls, all of that?
So I'm not promoting my book as much as I'm just saying a lot of what I write about in my book, Wake Up, is that it is letting go of the negative emotions. It is letting go of the ego tendencies. Through the process in my book is awakening through reflection. It's a life lessons workshop.
Mm-hmm.
And what you're doing is you're reflecting on the most transformational experiences of your life, and you are holding on to those most beautiful memories. But at the same time, you're recognizing the negative thought patterns that have been created by these events, situations that keep arising over and again that are actually very similar. And by journaling about those and identifying the causes and effects of those experiences, you can start to identify the life lessons you came here to learn.
Mm-hmm.
And as you apply those life lessons to your life today, then you can start advancing, right, to more evolved lessons. You can start evolving toward more advanced lessons. And in that way, you're on an evolutionary path. You're advancing on your spiritual path. Of course, this is also becoming more conscientious, more aware, right, of when ego is arising, more aware of when you're maybe not being as compassionate, caring, kind as you could be. You know, obviously it's a process and you make progress on your journey. But if you're tuning into this podcast, you're probably a very conscious, awake, and aware person already who is probably already engaging in meditation and different practices, you know, so, and maybe some have already even reached a sustainable transcendent state.
Mm.
But maintaining that state is so much fun. So I started to practice with that. So I'd go on my nature walk and I'd achieve this transcendent state. And I'd say, hey, you know what? I'm going to take this to the grocery store with me.
Mm-hmm.
And so I enter the grocery store in this attitude of gratitude, right? Look at all this beautiful produce. Like, it's so accessible. I didn't have to grow it and didn't have to, you know, hoe the field and, you know, everything. It's just there, all this beautiful food. And I'm surrounded by all of God's children, my brothers and sisters. And look at these people in service behind the deli counter, you know, waiting on me at the cash register. I'd smile at people. People smile back at me in the grocery line. I'd start a little conversation. Everyone would start laughing and giggling about what we're buying. Like, I started to realize as I was walking through public places, people would kind of like turn and look like, okay, there's something different, right? I'm smiling, but not being a goofy idiot. You know what I mean?
Sure,
I'm just
sure.
like a pleasant, you know, but I'm very aware. I'm not walking through, you know, like this, totally
Mm-hmm.
not engaging with anybody. I'm open, awake, and aware.
Mm-hmm.
Open my heart, right? I see
Mm-hmm.
someone who looks down. I give them just a little nudge, a little smile. It picks them up and they smile back, right? Some random act of kindness. Somebody drops a Kleenex here, you know, or a piece of paper, or whatever. You know, here you
Mm-hmm.
go. You know, I mean, it's a magical, mystical place to be in.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that you write is the meaning of life is to create, and the purpose of human life is to evolve. You just kind of referenced both of those principles as you were talking a few minutes ago. I'll say it again. The meaning of life is to create, and the purpose of human life is to evolve. Share more of what you mean by that.
So, as I started to have this insatiable quest for knowledge and my curiosity was just exploding, I was buying every book I could get my hands on, watching every documentary. I started watching Ancient Aliens, right? I started watching documentaries about near-death experiences. I became so fascinated, so curious, but I still didn't know the meaning and purpose of life. I'm like, well, what is the meaning and purpose of life? Like, where do we come from? Why are we here? Where are we going? Right? What's the meaning and purpose of it all? So, and I was really into Buddhism at the time. So I'm walking along a path and I'm actually looking down and I'm going through all these files in my head, right? Everything I've read and watched and learned and meditated on. And I feel this tap on my shoulder. And I'm like, okay. And I hear, look up. I look up in the sky, and in skywriting, it says, meaning to create, purpose to evolve. And I'm standing there going, okay, this is a miracle. I look down, my dogs are looking up, looking up, like, and then I got over the miracle of it all and was like, ah, thank you. It's so simple. Of course, to know thyself is in there, right? To know thyself through creating with meaning and evolving with purpose.
Beautiful. Suzanne, you do so many different things. You have got your hands, you're an author, you've got courses that you teach, you have events that you host, you have a horse ranch now that we'll get into. If you meet someone and they go, so what do you do? Like, what do you say to them?
That's a good question. It depends on the circumstance and the context of it, right?
Sure.
If it's, seems like somebody who might be applicable to my events, I might invite them to come to one of my events and talk about that. If it's someone in the context of seeking spiritual wisdom or into an intuitive reading or an energy healing session, I move into that. And yes, now I am in San Diego at my horse ranch, and I'm moving into what I created, Omne, Omne.com retreats. It's just following my heart, allowing divine synchronicity to unfold, going into meditation and listening to what comes through in messages, what I'm being shown, saying yes to life, surrendering, right? And then just kind of being in the moment of what's possible, where I'm being called.
Yeah, where you're being called. We're just getting to know each other, but your presence is effervescent, full of life, transcendent, a bit childlike with wonder. And then I also see the side of you that's going, okay, this woman is put on a pretty major event in Sedona for how many years now?
It'll be our 10th anniversary.
10th anniversary. So there's this strong business side of you as well. How do you navigate the transcendence, oh my gosh, the world is amazing, heart of gratitude, childlike wonder, with there are a lot of things to get done as a conscious leader in order to make the impact that I sense you have been called to make? How do you integrate those two?
Pray and move your feet, right? I love that saying. I'm fortunate to have actually spent the first part of my life in the corporate world with a business degree. And so, when I do business coaching sessions with people, I always ask them to reflect upon their skill set. What has their life shown them? What is, they have a college degree, or, what jobs have they had? What skills and experiences have they developed over the years? What talents do they have? Because everything accumulates ultimately to serve your mission. So you're not going to throw the corporate experience out the window because it wasn't aligned with your true calling, because it gave you all of these skills and gifts and abilities, right? And so you apply those and you continue to advance your technological skills as the tech age, comes in more and more. And if you have people who you can depend on to support you, then that's another big plus. I have found I'm in such gratitude. I feel so blessed to be able to serve that I can be, doing something very administrative and just be, filled with this sense of gratitude and, just feeling like I'm showered with so many blessings while I'm doing it. I also have a sister who's incredibly brilliant, and she supports me with a lot of the tech, with a lot of the administrative tasks.
That's wonderful. Talk to me about a couple of projects that you have going on. And I just want people to get a bit of a overview of them so that they can join you in some of these things if they are, interested. This interview will come out right after the Sedona Ascension Retreat ends, the 10th anniversary, which Mandy and I are excited to be there with you. Tell us about that event. And I know you have one coming up later this year, it sounds like, in Southern California. I don't know if we could talk about that yet.
Yeah, sure. Thank you for asking. So after the event, then I have time to start focusing on those other things I love to do: intuitive readings, energy healing. I do it mostly on Zoom so I can reach people from around the world. But now that I'm at my horse ranch in San Diego, I actually have a beautiful space. You can't see the whole of it, but where I can now do live sessions with people. I lived in Sedona for 10 years, and I worked out of a healing center there where I offered intuitive readings, sound healing, energy healing. And so I bring those gifts here to San Diego in this space now. And so I'll be able to do that. And also, I have horses, and I dearly love my beautiful horses. And I am taking courses right now in equine assisted learning, and also the Academy for Coaching with Horses. And so my goal will be to do healing and coaching with horses. And there's a giant tree on the property, and we've carved out a space in this tree where we can actually have a round pen. So you can sit in the round pen with my beautiful horse present. The horses that we have for that purpose are very gentle, very sweet, very soft, caring, loving. And when you start to play the crystal bowl, they'll drop their head right into the bowl. If you play the drums, they'll nudge the drums. I was holding up the chimes, and they'll bump the chimes because they realize it can make the chimes play. They'll drop their head into your neck. They'll nuzzle your ear. And just something about the presence of that magnificent animal who loves you unconditionally really raises your vibration. People just feel on cloud nine. And so, I'll incorporate some formal training in that regard with my own intuitive guidance and offer, like I said, I came up with this Om Nay, which always makes me laugh and makes everybody else laugh when I say it. So that right there is the joy frequency ignited, right? But I have a website, omnay.com, and people can sign up even now because I'm going to start offering those in the spring. Sessions and private retreats.
I was just going to say personal sessions, group sessions, retreats, and so forth. Yeah.
Yes.
Omne.com just happened to be available. That is wild.
And how that
That's
even
great.
came to me, right? Like these things, just epiphanies come to me. Oh, I know. Because we were sitting in this horse arena, and we were om, and the horses were nay, nay. And I was like, oh my God. Right. Omne.
And talk to me about your sacred certification courses that you have on your website as well.
Thank you so much for asking about that. I really felt called to teach courses. I'm so transparent. I'm turning 60 this year, and I really wanted to share with others, all that I have learned over the last 3 decades. Even prior to that, because I do offer business coaching sessions. I really want to offer business coaching. I really want the new generation of spiritually minded, business focused practitioners to step into their missions. And I would like to share, my decades of knowledge, experience, even contacts during my business coaching sessions. I want to propel people on their path towards success as they align with their divine mission in service to the love and light, to the awakening and ascension of humanity. And so these courses are chock full of spiritual wisdom, of knowledge, of business skills. It's all about, ascension concepts and just serving, and different ways that you can serve. So I'm very excited to offer these courses. One is called Interdimensional Intuitive. Another one is Transcendence Guide. So you can go to sacred.training, and the acronym SACRED is Spiritual Academy Courses and Resource for Enlightenment and Divinity.
Beautiful. Now, I know you've mentioned both of your books, but this is what you have termed the Up trilogy. So you've got Wake Up and then Rise Up, and there's another Up coming soon, I assume. You've got the third one in the works. Is that right?
Yes. The third book is Lighten Up. So this is a 10-day life lessons workshop. Wake Up. This is a 10-day ascension adventure. Rise Up, and Lighten Up will be a 10-day spiritual retreat. Wake Up is awakening through reflection. Rise Up is awakening through revelation. And Lighten Up is going to be about resurrection. So I'm very excited about that book. It's in the works. Hopefully it comes out next year. My sister's a book publisher, so I'm fortunate I have her by my side.
That's great. So you have been a part of this consciousness, mindfulness, spirituality space for quite some time. And I'm just curious about what shifts you have seen over the last number of years. You've been involved in this space how many years? 20, 30 years? 30 years, yeah. So what shifts have you seen over the last 30 years?
So I would say that 30 years ago, spirituality was more mainstream. Okay, so you had like Hay House, right, coming out with books that were spiritual in nature, but more around personal development, really, right? Wayne Dyer, Marianne Williamson, Louise Hay, they were spiritual, but more for a mainstream audience, really, so that, mainstream people could relate to the content. And I'm going to say there was a smaller percentage of people on the planet who were, really on the spiritual path the way it looks now. Of course, you had people who were into Buddhism, right? People who were into the self-realization centers. There was a big movement of transcendental meditation, TM, right? But now, as things have progressed, the books, becoming like more and more deeply spiritual. Many people started channeling in the 80s, which was really fascinating. There were schools you could go to, like the Berkeley Institute for Psychic Awareness, something like that. I'm not saying it quite right, but the Berkeley Psychic Institute, I think it was called. But people like Bashar, right, who's hugely popular now, and Lisa Royal Holt, like they kind of started in the 80s. And books like The Law of One, very popular now, but it came out in the 80s. Mm-hmm. And so, there was a movement at that time. And also a lot more people started meditating, right? And so I think it became, then over the years, it just gradually has expanded. It has, spirituality has spread. It's taken on I think, a deeper spirituality with more advanced concepts. And then as we move into this golden age, which was predicted in the 80s by the Law of One books, there's a book, the Bilgi Katabi, the Knowledge book, the Urantia book, like these big, heavy tomes, but they're all channeled material saying in the 80s that, 30, 40 years from now, will be the shift of the ages, and you'll move into a golden age, into this fifth dimensional awareness, like, you know what I mean? So, but now we're getting closer and closer and closer to the ascension. And so now, more and more people around the world are waking up to this. And a lot of spiritualists have bought in a connection with our star brothers and sisters. And so, because oftentimes I would find earlier on that ufology and spirituality didn't necessarily mix. Ufologists weren't necessarily spiritual, but a lot of spiritual people believed in extraterrestrial beings and were channeling star beings like Bashar. Daryl Anka channeling Bashar, and Lisa Royal Holt channeling all these beings from Sirius and the Pleiades, and, Urantia book, and just people, around the world starting to channel our star brothers and sisters, because that's the way that they can come in right now. There's something about galactic law that you have to have the majority of the population who would not be frightened by the presence of otherworldly beings. And I think that's why there's a lot of soft disclosure, even in movies and such, to prepare humanity for that.
Mm-hmm. Suzanne Ross, Transcendence.com. That's where we want people to check out all of your work. I know you've got, obviously, your program, sacred.training, omne.com. I got that right? Omne?
Thank you. Yeah.
.com. Oh, great. We'll put all of these links in our show notes, of course. So, Suzanne, it is just great to be with you. I feel your effervescent presence, your transcendent presence. I love your vision of maintaining transcendence over time. I'm going to take that away from our conversation to go, how do I maintain that? Not just in these moments of bliss, but when I'm at the grocery store.
Very good. And on the note of transcendence, so I was having an Ascension and a Transcendence retreat in Sedona in the spring equinox and in the fall equinox. Now I'm going to have my fall event in San Diego. It'll be called San Diego Transcendence Retreat, but you'll find it on my SuzanneRossTranscendence.com website, and I'll create a website for it. But at the same time, it's October 25th and 26th. Mark your calendar, because we're going to have some amazing guests, and it's going to be at this gorgeous venue called the Legacy Center. It's near Halloween, so we might have a costume ball.
I'm going to dress up like Bashar. That's
okay.
Bashar
might be there, so he might find that very interesting. Maybe by then Bashar will actually be present. Daryl Anka has actually said that he's coming more and more in to his own higher self. Daryl Anka himself being the one teaching, speaking, because he says that Bashar himself may become present on the planet and speak for himself.
Beautiful, beautiful. Suzanne, thank you for sharing your heart, your wisdom, and all the great things that you're doing in the world. Really appreciate the time with you.
Thank you so much for this opportunity, David. I look forward to seeing you in a couple weeks in Sedona. I send you and all the viewers love and many blessings. Namaste.
Thanks for listening to the Awaken Magazine podcast. If you enjoyed this episode and our other conversations, would you mind taking a moment to leave a 5-star review and maybe even a comment on Spotify or Apple Podcasts? That's one of the ways that you can give back to the show and help us reach more people. And of course, feel free to share the episode with a friend. And if you're not already on our email list, we send out an inspiring email every Monday morning full of articles and interviews. Just head on over to awakenedmagazine.com and click subscribe and join for free. Our hope is that all the resources we share will help our world continue awakening to love.